Studio Mappa is a name synonymous with CGI. Oh, what's that? A manga you like is getting adapted into an anime by Studio Mappa? Which happens a lot actually. Hope you like CGI. Mappa obviously uses a lot of 3D for a variety of reasons. Their usage of CGI is a polarizing topic that tends to divide fans, because what isn't a polarizing topic that tends to divide fans these days? So, let's look at the studio's usage of CGI throughout the years. Of course, pretty much every Mappa project uses some amount of CG, nearly every anime does. We will, however, talk about the more noteworthy uses. Make sure to subscribe. Studio Mappa was founded back in 2011 by the legendary Masao Maruyama. Maruyama understood how important CGI was, and under his leadership, Garo the Animation was produced. It marked the first major use of CGI models in a Mappa project. The show was directed by Yuichiro Hayashi, who is the current series director for Attack on Titan, and it was a mixed bag. This was essentially a learning phase for the studio and for Hayashi. Neither of them were CGI experts at this point. Studio Mappa had its priorities straight. Garo the Animation and Rage of Bahamut aired simultaneously, and while Bahamut was a lot more impressive as far as 2D animation was concerned, Garo was a lot more creative with its CGI. Rage of Bahamut looked insanely good, and it did use 3D models, mostly during the season finale. However, Mappa wasn't even credited for the CG. The models were animated by Yamato Works and Studio Sublimation. Garo was different. Mappa was responsible for the CGI animation in 23 out of the 24 episodes, alongside Yamato Works and Sublimation. The goal was clear: gain experience and bring as much of the 3D department in-house as possible. The CGI in Garo was experimental. It wasn't perfect, but at the same time, it was surprisingly well handled. The models were very heavily detailed and naturally had their clunky moments, but the vision was there. In fact, you can tell that the use of CG improved as the episodes rolled on. It went from this to this. It was an impressive show for the time, and it marked the beginning of Mappa's mastery of CGI. The sequels to Garo also featured similar uses of CG, with Vanishing Line polishing a lot of the ideas, all while overdoing it a bit with the camera work. Garo, Vanishing Line and Inuyashiki, both of which aired simultaneously, marked the first appearance of Motoyoku No. He is currently one of the most important members of the CGI department at the studio. More about him later. Now, while I haven't finished watching Inuyashiki, I have seen enough to know that the CGI usage was questionable at best. Mappa's attempt at replicating human movements using 3D didn't play out too well. Okuno was also credited as a CGI animator on episode 23 of Vanishing Line, an episode directed by Yuichiro Hayashi, and the CGI in it ranged from questionable to really good. It's also worth noting that Mappa was never fully producing their CGI in-house. While they had a role to play, so did several other studios, which isn't necessarily a good thing. While it does help reduce the workload, it also reduces the amount of communication between the various departments, leading to a decrease in the overall visual harmony. Which brings us to Dorohedoro, which was special. Another Yuichiro Hayashi project, it had a unique workflow with close interactions between the CGI and the 2D departments. Dorohedoro was an organized production. It was a hybrid of 2D and 3D animation. The staff had already decided which scenes would be 2D and which would be 3D during the screenplay stage, which comes before the storyboards. This helped them structure the various elements in a competent manner. I won't go into detail, but basically a lot of effort went into the modeling and the rigging process, and a lot of attention went to the outfits, some of which were modeled from scratch while others were drawn on top of the models. The main character, Kaiman, had 26 different models, which included various amounts of damage and outfits. The touches, details and textures were added directly on top of the models using Substance Painter, which is different from the regular approach, where the compositing team adds these elements. Character designer Tomohiro Kishi made corrections at this stage. These corrections were applied onto the models, which meant very little animation direction work was required for the episodes. In fact, the AD correction rate was about 47% according to the staff. It's generally 100% for 2D shows. The team had created various workflows depending on the amount of CG present in a cut. Cuts with no CGI were produced differently than those which did contain 3D elements. The most unique thing about this show was its presentation. Despite using a lot of CGI, the show was presented like a 2D anime. The camera didn't fly all over the place or rotate constantly. This helped the scenes feel natural. Of course, the models looking good and blending in helped with that, We can thank series director Yuichiro Hayashi for this approach. He storyboarded the entire show, every single episode, all of the ADs, and the opening. His understanding of CGI as a medium made this show work. Of course, the CGI wasn't fully produced in-house. Studios like Graphinica and VSign were heavily involved, but the staff maintained a certain level of cooperation between these various companies. They created what they call character animation settings, which were sent out as reference. These helped increase the overall consistency. Dorohedoro was a bold project which helped shape modern MAPPA's visual identity as far as CGI is concerned. That brings us to Attack on Titan, the exact opposite of Dorohedoro. While Dorohedoro used CGI because it wanted to, Attack on Titan used CGI because it had to. The Dorohedoro team, aka director Yuichiro Hayashi, character designer Tomohiro Kishi, and CGI animator Motoyo Kuno, were given an awful schedule and told to prepare a high quality show. They had the 2D Titan designs prepared, but they could not use those, which is a shame. I can only imagine how much of a nightmare this show was for the storyboard artists. While I did like the 3D model for the Armored Titan, which actually moved unlike Season 3, the rest of the models, especially the Attack Titan, looked wonky. I wouldn't be surprised if certain models were unfinished. The CGI was produced by both Studio MAPPA and Studio VSign, and while the 3D animation had its moments, as a whole the 3D in Part 1 didn't look particularly good. Fortunately, only 4 of the 16 episodes featured 3D Titan combat. Part 2 was an improvement. More of the CGI was produced in-house and Motoyo Kuno was appointed to be the new CGI director. Under Okuno's direction, the CGI use felt more deliberate. The shots were more dynamic and the general quality of the models increased. The sheer difference in the quality between the Rumbling Titans and every other CGI model says a lot. The staff probably knew that the Rumbling had to be 3D irrespective of the schedule. As such, the 3D usage there was intentional, which is why it looked so good. Part 3 didn't feature any CGI Titan shifters besides the Rumbling Titans until the very end, which is one of the reasons why it looked great. The Colossal Titans looked amazing and their movement didn't look particularly off-putting. A lot of care went into these models and heavy amounts of 2D texture work was added to them. The Rumbling features one of the best uses of CGI in an otherwise 2D anime. We Attack on Titan fans are lucky to have Hayashi's direction. His experience with 3D models saved our show. And that brings us to Chainsaw Man. And I've talked about this show on multiple occasions, I won't repeat myself. This show, in my opinion, features the best use of CGI in a 2D anime. A major chunk of the CGI for this show was produced in-house. In fact, other studios were credited for CGI assistance and not for CGI production. The way I see it, most of the heavy lifting was done by Studio MAPPA. Motoyo Kuno, remember him? He was the CGI animation director for this show, and under his direction, the team employed a lot of techniques to make the CGI feel more natural. The models had a large amount of textures and a lot of care was put into the immediate surroundings, making the models blend in. Even the 2D animation moved in a lifelike manner, which helped integrate the CGI. Of course, this was only possible because of the all-star lineup of 2D animators. Not a lot of people can animate a scene which moves in such a lifelike manner. Chainsaw Man was an enormous production and the CGI was spectacular. It had the 2D textures that Dorohedoro and Attack on Titan perfected. It had the lifelike movement which Inuyashiki tried to execute, and it had the 2D-like presentation that made Dorohedoro special. Chainsaw Man's CGI was a milestone in MAPPA's catalog, and it was a major step forward for anime as a whole. And that was a brief look at MAPPA's use of CG throughout the years. Of course, these shows have different staff members, so this isn't exactly a linear timeline, but it's fascinating regardless. Who knows how good the next CGI heavy MAPPA show would look? I for one can't wait. That's about it. Did you like this video? Check out this other bit of content on screen if you did. Like and subscribe, and until next time.